Hi, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar as we dive into how to survive a ransomware attack, looking at infection vectors, response, and long-term defenses. I am Mary Beth Hamilton, Vice President at Dataprise of Marketing, and I will be the moderator for today's discussion. A couple of housekeeping items. The webinar will run approximately 45 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on how many questions we receive. It is being recorded, and post-event, we will send you a copy of the recording as well as the presentation slides. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature in the GoToWebinar interface, and I will be sure to ask those to our attendees or our speakers as we near the end of the presentation. Just a quick snapshot on Dataprise. If you don't know us, we were founded in 1995 and today are the leading strategic IT solution provider to mid-market IT leaders. And we believe that technology should allow you to do the best at what you do. Cybersecurity is one of the key areas we are supporting our clients, as well as managed user, managed infrastructure, and a whole host of other services where we really aim to be their true complete technology partner. So now let me introduce our expert speakers. On the data side of the house, I have Stephen Jones, aka Jones, who is our senior director of cybersecurity and responsible for the strategic design, management, and execution of our managed cyber services. He is a veteran in the security operations space, bringing more than 20 years of experience in cybersecurity and technical leadership to the team. Jones, thank you for joining me. I also have Jeff Wheat, who is the CISO at Blue Team Alpha. Jeff has a long history in providing unparalleled operational and cybersecurity analytical guidance, both internally and externally. He brings more than 35 years of experience in information security, IT architecture, cyber ops, risk management, and a whole host of other areas of expertise. He's responsible for Blue Team Alpha's cybersecurity policies, SOC operations, data and platform protection. And he is a national security leadership professional who has a very rich background and is going to share a lot of interesting insights if our pre-conversations were any indication. So
Thank you, Mary Beth.
next, yeah, absolutely. Before we get into the really good stuff, I will just quickly review the agenda. We are going to talk about the state of ransomware. Jeff's going to kick us off. Jones is going to chime in, and we're going to set the stage for why we're having this conversation. We're also going to explore pay or not pay. What does the landscape currently look like? What are some of the common infection vectors and that hackers are using to get into systems? And then what are those first lines of defense that you need to have? And then when a breach does occur and ransomware is introduced, what are the do's and don'ts? How do you remediate? And then one part of this conversation we're particularly excited about is sharing some real life situations, talking about the anatomy of the attack, how we supported clients in responding, and what the outcomes were there, so we can really bring it home for everyone. So with that, Jeff, I will kick it over to you to help us frame the conversation of why we're even having this conversation.
All right, thank you, Mary Beth. First off, I'd like to kind of talk about where ransomware came from and what you're kind of dealing with. It started off as a shotgun effect. Everyone, their dog was getting hit by the ransomware people. But as they started evolving that and treating it like a business, and we'll talk a little bit about the business side of it, as they started to evolve that, they really started to hone in on where the money was. And just to give you some background, you're really dealing with a sophisticated threat in terms of a lot of this is coming from behind what would have been the Iron Curtain before, places that don't have extradition, things of that nature. You're also going up against nation state level threats in those countries. They don't have 401ks or whatever. So when intelligence agents that, work in this space kind of wear out their usefulness to those government entities, they've got to find a way to pay for themselves. And one of the things they do is they put their skills out on the open market, so you can imagine, you're dealing with, basically nation state intelligence group level expertise. You're not just going up against, someone in their mother's basement, some script kiddie, or like we call them, against this. And that kind of is showing itself in the sophistication of the attacks. Okay. Again, in 2020, we were seeing them every 10 seconds. That's actually the rate of ransomware is starting to slow down, but what they're doing is they're focusing more in on where the money is. And if you want to flip over to the business deal, we'll talk a little bit about that. There's a term called the Russian business network. Okay, that's kind of the pinnacle of this. So next slide. Sorry, Mary Beth. Oh, sorry. I'm on mine. I'm looking at my slides. Okay, so within the business of ransomware, they're running it like a corporation. They look at where the largest set of money is. The higher, more sophisticated ones go at the top of the pyramid, and they filter it down. They reuse it. When they're done with it at the top, they pass it down the chain to the lower levels. So it's a constant threat level, and the sophistication of the threat keeps going, and they're constantly tuning their craft. So it's a moving target. So that's one of the things to always consider is, when ransomware, and we'll talk about paying the ransomware and stuff like that, they do things that are healthy for a business. So to always think of it in terms of how you're dealing with that, why, the threat's there, why it's always going to be there. As long as the money's there, they're going to stay there. And if the ransomware groups or the cyber bad groups were a country, they'd be the third largest country in the world in terms of GDP. So, which is pretty scary when you think about it. So
I'd like to
go
add
ahead.
one thing there, Jeff, to add a little more color to something you mentioned, which I think is really interesting. You mentioned that the trend is actually going down as far as number or percentage of companies that are being hit by this as the tactics are changing. Interestingly enough, that's going from 2017, it's about 54% of companies out there had some form of ransomware incident. Through 2021, we're looking at closer to 37, 38%. And that downward trend is due to that change in tactics. So as Jeff mentioned, going from a shotgun approach, just trying to get anything and everything, to more strategic targeted attacks. And you're seeing much larger targets. So the Colonial Pipeline very recently stopped fuel deliveries to the East Coast for a whole week. There's also a recent attack in Ireland against their healthcare system that shut down their critical health services for a week as well. So we're starting to see these changes where they're becoming, to Jeff's point, very business-like about how they're approaching this. Instead of going after very small targets, they find that it's more lucrative to go after larger targets. And this is exactly how any other legit legal business would function. So just wanted to add that little piece in there.
Yeah, thanks, Jones. And a key point on that is the same way as you, of a business, would identify your market and figure out how to optimize that market, they're doing the same thing. So if it's important to you and of financial value to you, it's important to them. And Jones is going to talk a little bit later about the dual ransomware scenarios that we're talking. So I won't steal that thunder. But if you always kind of consider, in terms of dealing with this stuff, you got to think like the bad guy. It's like, what if I were a robber, if I were a bad guy, if I were a cyber criminal, what would I go after? How would I do it? And stuff. And that's how our in order to defend, you need to know how to attack. Right. So we kind of use that mentality going forward. So we can go to the next slide if you want. And it's just showing this org chart, just as, and I'll be real quick on this. This is just, they've organized themselves as a syndicate, as a crime syndicate, the same way a corporation would. And think of that as like the org chart and how it goes down. You have the big players at the top and the smaller players at the bottom. So with that, I'm going to transition. Oh, go ahead, Jones. Sorry.
Yeah, one interesting, sorry to step on you there. One interesting thing here as well to illustrate just how business-like these new arrangements are. One of the, what was reading just recently about how antivirus companies kind of unknowingly helped the ransomware operators, these guys at the top that are developing these kits. There was an AV company, as well as some private researchers that found a flaw in that dark side ransomware code, where they were reusing the same keys to encrypt and decrypt multiple customers. So the private researchers were being very quiet about it, strategically approaching victims through back channels, whereas AV companies blasted this out as a marketing opportunity and ended up alerting the ransom as a service operators, the developers at the top, that they had found a flaw in that code. The dark side crew actually responded back and thanked the AV companies for pointing out the flaw, and were able to fix it prior to the Colonial Pipeline ransomware situation. So, that is how business like they are. They're looking for people to point out vulnerabilities, and they are actively patching and fixing them. Unfortunately, faster than most businesses are patching and fixing vulnerabilities.
Jones, since we've started talking about the actual ransomware, why don't you roll that into the pay versus don't pay kind of story that we have in our next slide?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So real quick, double extortion. This may be a term that you guys are hearing lately. And what this is where the attackers will actually steal a copy of the data and either delete or encrypt your local copy. And they essentially will double extort you, ask you to pay twice, once to unlock the local copy, and the second time to keep them from sharing or dumping or leaking the copy that they took. So pretty insidious, but also very effective depending on the data that was taken. And so that's, real quick, how kind of where things are shifting to is they're trying to make sure that they've got enough leverage to entice you to pay. Now, the pay or not pay is a really interesting question about which way to go. Everybody's got an opinion. Wanted to walk through just a few pros and cons here for each one. So a pro of paying the ransom could be you may get access to some percentage of that encrypted data. The statistics aren't great. They're not 100%, obviously, and not all of the ransomware groups will cough up a key. Another pro, recovery from the incident could be quicker. If you do get a working decryptor, if you do get the actual keys, you can potentially recover quicker. And it could be cheaper than rebuilding the network. So those are some pros. Some cons of paying: you're supporting this ransomware business model. You're funding a criminal organization, which only encourages them to do it again. One that you may not have thought of, though, is this marks you as willing to pay a ransom for future attacks. So once people find out that you're willing to pay, you become a bigger target. And also the con is you may not get a decryptor or a functioning decryptor. From the Colonial Pipeline, they were able to get a decryptor. It was so slow, they ended up rebuilding themselves anyway. So the ransom that they did pay ultimately was not terribly useful. Now, on the don't pay side, some pros are your total remediation costs won't also include the cost of ransom, which can reach up into the millions of dollars. You're not supporting a criminal organization. You're not identifying yourself as an easy mark for future attacks. The cons of not paying: you may not get access to that encrypted data again, or you could also provoke the attacker into doing something malicious. So if they do have a foothold in the environment, it is possible that your refusal to pay could spark that as well.
And just to add a couple things to that, to Jones's point, it's not just about getting out and getting the encryption key. I mean, imagine someone stole all the furniture in your house and locked it in a room. You still have to go put the furniture back. It's kind of the same with the network. One, you have to recover from that, but also you need to be very thorough to look for any Easter eggs that they may have left, because as part of that business process, that org chart you saw, if you're hit by the higher levels, what they're going to do is, they've got their money, and to Jones's point, you've proven that you'll pay, so that gets sold downstream to the lesser criminals, possibly even the script kiddies, who may be less reputable about giving you that key back, just because they're not as business minded as the top ends are, so you're not done just by getting the encryption key back. You do need to go do a thorough review, clean everything and stuff, and get professionals to do that for you. So that's another key point to the recovery side is, it's not just about the encryption where it's about getting your business continuity back as quick as you can, so you can get back to the business of making money, but also making sure this doesn't happen again.
Perfect.
Okay.
So let's Jones, I'm going to bring you in here to let's talk about what are some of the infection vectors, how are they getting in, and what types of first lines of defense, and I say first lines, there's probably many behind that as well, but do firms need to have in place? But then obviously that is also where items get through and therefore we wind up in these situations. So let's provide some guidance in that regard, and then we will talk once they get through these, what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So infection vectors for ransomware, the three top or most common, social engineering / phishing emails. These are really popular. Phishing emails kind of bleeds into bad links as well, or malicious links. Those two are highly related. These are probably the two most common, but both of these are almost always leveraging an exploit against the vulnerability. There are ways that ransomware vendors and attackers are exploiting these vulnerabilities without email, watering hole attacks where they can lure you into specially crafted websites. There's also using exploit kits against public-facing vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities are really the heart of this. The phishing emails, the bad links are really the delivery mechanism, but the exploit is how they're getting in, how they're getting that foothold. So those are the three most common. Can you go to the next slide, Mary Beth? The layers of defense here. So recommendations here, patching your vulnerabilities. Vulnerability management, while it may sound boring, is absolutely the #1 recommendation to protect yourself and to add some layers of defense to your enterprise. Another would be an advanced endpoint protection capability. We can do lots of cool things with this. You need something that is able to analyze the processes and the files that are happening on your endpoints. This is where ransomware starts. The exploit gets them in, but they ultimately need to launch some code on an endpoint. And that can be a laptop, that could be a mobile device, that could be a server. They need to start somewhere to start encrypting files or locking you out of your resources. With that advanced endpoint, you should have the ability to do endpoint isolation. And that is going to be one of the first lines of defense at stopping this, is isolating that infected endpoint from everything else. Automated backups are another piece of your critical infrastructure that you should absolutely have, and this can help you basically avoid having to pay. If they encrypt files, if they take something, or even delete them or lock you out of certain systems, if you have backups, you can always rebuild. So keeping a copy off-site, also highly recommended. Doing backups but keeping them on-site is very dangerous and risky, because if the attackers were able to get to that, your fail-safe there is certainly in trouble. SOC monitoring, as well as a SOC or security monitoring, is another piece of that defense in depth. All of the security tools in the world don't mean a thing if no one's watching them. So having a good monitoring service or a monitoring protocol internally can really help you spot trouble before it gets out of control. Managed SOC offerings will also have rules and alerts to identify suspicious activity, such as a large number of files being accessed, modified, or deleted in a short period of time, as well as any beaconing to known C2 infrastructure where the ransomware is looking to get its instruction. And then last, my recommendation here, security awareness training. Users are on the front line of this battle. They're the ones largely driving the endpoints, and so they need to know what they're up against. So a good security awareness training program will really help keep your workforce aware of their surroundings and teach them about the real world threats. Just kind of using terms like ransomware, double extortion, doesn't carry the full weight for people who aren't always in this type of world like cyber professionals and security professionals are. We got to make sure we're teaching everybody else what's out there, how it works, what to be aware of.
The one thing I'd add to that would be on the policy side, in terms of industry best practices, in terms of separation of duties, no single points of failures, access audits. one of the things that we see as a common entry point is, you know, the bad guys find an account that's been neglected or whatever, the person's gone, and they've, you know, done what we call credential stuffing because they've gotten their password for their LinkedIn account or whatever else, and you know that person used the same LinkedIn account, so brute force works a lot easier. You know, just being, you know, cleaning the house, making sure, you know, you do every once in a while, you go to make sure hasn't been privilege creep and stuff like that, and that you've gotten rid of, you know, individuals that have been offboarded. You know, make sure that offboarding process is clean, as well as, you know, looking at the systems themselves to make sure that the systems have been completely shut down. We had at least one customer in the last week or so that the exploit point was a system that they thought they had shut down, but they did not. And you know, of course, the bad guy found that, right, and got in that direction. So that's it.
Excellent. And I know we'll get more of those real life examples as we move along here. So Jones, you've outlined, you know, the different defense layers. Now, can you talk about what are the signs? Like, how does someone know that they're under attack? What's suspicious? What should they watch out for?
Sure. So for an individual that, you know, is using an endpoint, some signs that you may have a ransomware problem are things like being unable to access files on your machine. Sometimes you'll see even a very gaudy splash screen like the one you see on the slide here that indicates that your files have been encrypted, or when you open the files, you'll see a warning there that the file is locked and unavailable. Rapid deletion of files as well. If you're noticing that folders are being deleted or removed in a rapid fashion, that's also another big indicator. Being locked out of your account can also be another indicator, unexpectedly or even repeatedly in a short period of time. Those are things that an individual might notice. From a SOC perspective, or especially a managed SOC perspective, some of the things we notice from customer environments is the addition of things like unauthorized email forwarding rules, logins from unfamiliar domains, unopenable files where we're getting lots of errors from the file systems that things are unopened. We also get alerts for large changes of files, you know, in the tens of thousands that are being rapidly opened, closed, or modified in very short periods of time. As well as, you know, we'll see typically an increase in quantity and quality of the phishing attempts against the customer. Some of the other things to be aware of, if you don't have processes in place to handle some of these things, unexpected money transfers in or out of accounts, almost always out of your accounts and into other accounts, and unexpected requests from vendors to do things like change where you're paying them or how you're paying them. These can all be precursors to an attack or signs that you're actively having a problem.
Jeff, are there any other common ones? There you go.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you know, just in general, that all kind of falls into the see something, say something. And you know, one of the case studies we're going to share with you is an example of how you know, DataPrize seeing something early basically saved that business from being, you know, business terminal. So the big thing is, it may seem small to you, but if it's weird, you know, tell somebody. You know, again, you know, we're seeing a lot in the remote login sessions. You know, that's one we're seeing as a common exploit. So, you know, check your port, you know, for your IT staff, check the ports that are open, you know, RDP and some of things like that, or, you know, no one should have remote access to your systems without you knowing about it. So if you got an unknown there, that's a key one. Also, when you see that people's if all of a sudden someone can't get into their account, like their password's been changed, that's a huge one. You know, that's probably the biggest indicator we've seen, you know, when you do that. And that's usually when you're starting with what I call hand fighting with the bad guy. You know, if they're changing things as you're looking at them, you've got, you know, you got to move quick, because they're getting to the point where you're going to get the ransomware soon. So anyway, those are the things I had.
So then how about you start us off with, what are the do's and don'ts once you've seen those red flags?
All right. Well, the first thing to do once that hand fighting starts and you know you've got it, you want to isolate that network. Okay. You know, the first thing is, you know, I call it taking a fire axe to the internet connection. Basically, you want to, shut off any further damage. And at that point, they're going to know, so you've got to move quickly. You need to check on your backups. There's a number of things on there, to get out. You possibly want to contact legal counsel once you actually determine that you are in a situation with a bad guy. If they're running out and you're going hand-to-hand combat with them. The don'ts are you don't want to turn things off, because you're destroying evidence at that point. You're destroying, that's how someone like us gets in there and follows the breadcrumbs to figure out all the other places they went, right? So it's more like go to the back, pull the internet connection out, or turn the wireless connection off, or go to the network servers and pull the internet connection. So whatever you do, but do not turn off the machines. And then we want to do not try and clean up the ransomware without professional assistance, because part of that is, think of it as a fingerprint. During our investigations, the nature of what they've done kind of tells us they have standard operating procedures, just like we do. So, we kind of know what they are. So when they do that, we kind of know where to go look, and that lets us get out ahead of the hand fighting with the bad guy. So those are the main things. The main thing is stop the network connection, stop the problem, and then call someone to help you figure out what's going on. Early detection is the key. It's kind of like cancer. It's a lot easier to not get cancer or prevent cancer than it is to get rid of it once you've got it. So the earlier you do these things, the less money it's going to cost you, both in ransom, because that ransom can be negotiated based on the level that they got into you, as well as the amount of remediation and cleanup. So earlier the better. So
perfect. So now if you'll take us through the steps, what does that IR process look like from discovery through recovery?
Right, and this isn't groundbreaking. This is like NIST standard: discovery, identify, containment, eradication, recovery. You'll see these in any kind of, you can look it up online, whatever. I guess one of the things that we do that is a differentiator is we work these in parallel to the extent that we can, right? We don't get out ahead of ourselves and reinfect. But the main thing when we're dealing with you is to try and get you back to business continuity, right? Get you back to the business of making money. And that, the quicker we can do that, the less influence the ransomware people have on you. It may be that we can get you back without paying the ransom, if we're in there early enough or whatever. So with all these things, if you think of them as, it shows this as linear, but if you think of it as iterary, there's constant loops out of each of those back to the discovery phase and continue on. So that's critical to do that. And in order to do that, you need to understand what is important to you. In our world, we call that a tabletop exercise. We run through a mock scenario where you go, who are the people to contact? You don't want to be trying to figure out who to contact, for which different parts in the middle of a battle, right? You kind of want to pre-rehearse that, but it also lets you understand and do gap analysis on, hey, we don't have offsite backups. Is that something we should look at? And the answer is yes. All those kind of things where you go through that threat scenario. What if this were to happen to us? Are we prepared to do that going forward? So, those are what we call tabletop exercises and things like that are pretty industry standard. But the main thing here is that this IR process the more you can be iterative and parallel, the quicker your business continuity will come up. So that's the main thing on that.
Perfect.
And I don't
Jeff,
want to take up too much. Go ahead. I was going to say, I want to get to the case
studies. You want to get
studies.
to the case studies. I know. Those are where, that's how I hooked you to join us, right? No, but before we go there, I'd received a comment from one of the attendees, which I think is an important thing to note, is to ensuring that you're also in that early process contacting your cyber insurance or your legal counsel. And I'm not sure where you see that occurring in the IR process, but if you had, comments on how you typically see that play out.
At the point at which that you've lost data, especially if you're in an environment like HIPAA where you've lost PHI, those kind of things that you're definitely in, and was it 500 records, that magic number, whether you're getting into a whole nother realm of notification. Obviously, you don't want to throw out you don't want to be Chicken Little, right? You want to make sure it is actually an event. But once you do, yes, I would do that in parallel. I would start that that insurance deal. Now, the other thing is your deductible, right? Is like, there's things you can do that are below your deductible that might save you even having to mess with the insurance company. So having that peace of mind, having that mechanism where you could run an indicator of compromise down, and maybe, it's kind of like, I'm going to use the cancer example. It's like burning off a mole versus chemo, right? If it's just to burn off a mole, in the cyber context, if it's just they've just started, they just got through the front door and you stopped them, it may not require going to the insurance company. So that's the main thing. And then of course, always, you do what you can. That's part of these gap analysis. Do what you can, identify the gaps, fill the gaps that you can, and what you can't, you transfer the risk to your insurance. So it's important. The insurance companies are getting creative, I guess, is a way of putting it. So you definitely want to make sure you're covered for what types of ransomware you're dealing with too, because there's always loopholes, right? So what you pay, you get what you pay for, right? So that's the main thing on that.
Thank you for letting me toss that one here. Thought it was an interesting point to cover. Okay, so now we'll get into some real life examples. And Jones, I'm going to ask you to kick this one off, and then Jeff, please jump in as we go along, since your team was critical in this situation. So with that, Jones, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Yeah. So this ransomware case study was fairly recent. Involved a healthcare client of ours, and the situation was that an engineer with the customer noticed that some files were rapidly disappearing from their Dropbox. And as they began to investigate what was going on, they ended up getting logged out of the system and unable to get back in. This caused a bit of panic. The customer, thankfully, very quickly exercised their incident response plan and quickly escalated the incident up to Dataprise. We were able to confirm through our monitoring tools that we were seeing some very unsavory activity and the absolute beginning of a ransomware incident. So the SOC analysts were able to engage Blue Team Alpha, Jeff's team, very quickly to get them engaged in a matter of hours. And that's where I want to kind of turn it over to Jeff. This is the really interesting part of the story. So please, fill us in with kind of what happened through the incident response process there, and just how close this customer came to shuttering the doors.
Yeah, and this is a classic example. I mean, this was a matter of minutes. I mean, they were one click away from being ransomware. And for this organization's particular case, it would have been, we believe it would have been business terminal, because they were a nonprofit. They're not made of money, whatever. But we got in there, and what our threat hunters found, I call them my apex predators, or my red team. What they found was that and this is what I call the hand fighting. As soon as they got in there and started shutting things off, the bad guy started running out fast. He was not running out of the place, trying to run out in front of them. So it was a constant back and forth of jumping in front of him and stopping. But one of the things they did was they replaced up to 141 files, executables that you would normally have clicked on, like chrome.exe, right? They replaced those with their own code to enact the total encryption. It was the tripwire. And we found 141 of those across the organization that were totally infected, but they were just short of the ransomware. Now, the bad news on this one is they had been in there for a little while, long enough that they had extracted personal health stuff. So, they're not out of the woods yet on the ransomware. They didn't have to pay the ransomware for the encryption because we stopped that. But they're still in the woods a little bit on embarrassing, it's what we call a Contini ransomware, where they double ransom you, like Joan said earlier, where it's, they're going to encrypt your ransomware, but they're also going to threaten to post embarrassing things. And you think mental health and stuff like that. It's not something you want out on the World Wide Web. But, they came at them with a number of different angles. One were those executables. They got in through a remote access that was left open. Okay, and I think it was left open by a vendor, if I remember right. where they'd come in, done some maintenance, and left it open. Well, the bad guy found that, and that's how they got into the organization, was through that remote access in this case. So, any Jones, any further on that? The point being is Dataprise was outstanding in this. They basically saved that company, and I'm not just saying that. I mean, it was one of those ones. They were almost in tears when we were done that, because they realized how big of a bullet they just dodged. I mean, we basically saved all those people's jobs because of data prizes. See something, say something. It was very sharp and noticed things that just weren't right and called us in to get after it, and we were on it within an hour. So
yeah, no, the only thing I would add there is that the relationship that we have with Blue Team Alpha enabled us to enact this quickly, and we were able to produce a very positive outcome for the customer through our teamwork together. So I was very happy. The customer, even though they had a not inexpensive incident response situation, they were ultimately very satisfied, very happy with the outcome and the teamwork that they saw between Dataprise, Blue Team Alpha, and their own staff. So all in all, I think this is probably one of my favorite use cases through my career, because everything worked exactly like it was supposed to. As much kudos goes to Blue Team Alpha for being able to rapidly jump in. Absolutely one of the reasons that we partnered with Blue Team Alpha is to be able to provide that rapid level of response to our customers when they absolutely need it. So thank you, Jeff, and team.
You bet. Well, thank you to my apex predators. They get all the credit, but to that hand in glove, we also coordinated very closely with Dataprise on the business continuity, and they were able to get to us, hey, here are the critical servers for these people to get back to serving the, again, it was a nonprofit that was, servicing people in need, right? It was health, mental health, or not mental health, it was a addictive services, some stuff like that we needed to get that back up because people needed the care. I mean, there's a human element to this, so that was rewarding, in that being able to get that up, so they could take care of those patients, but then still gradually bring, the rest of the company up in a restricted way, that we only let certain things in, locked it down. It's what we call a stringent policy, where we're scrutinizing everything that's come in. So until we're sure everything's clean. So.
And Jones, can I ask you, so an additional lessons learned is, so the reference to, if a vendor left a port open, is that something where if you were doing like vulnerability scans or penetration tests, like how do you find something like that to, again, sort of have that layer of defense and prevent this from occurring if possible?
Yeah, no, those are fantastic questions. Things like that are often discovered through penetration testing, through external vulnerability scanning, through asset inventories as well. So there are lots of things at play here that can help. These are things that are baked into our service offerings at Dataprise because I believe they are important and they absolutely have real world use. Providing an annual penetration test, making sure that we're doing continuous vulnerability management scanning. So it's not just snapshot in time on a quarterly or annual basis, but on a continuous basis, in as little time as several days between scans. So that way you're able to catch things quickly and to be proactive about providing, remediation mechanisms for these things. Customers aren't always able to close all gaps. They may not be able to apply all patches, but there are mitigating controls, again, that we can recommend. There are lots of options to really help people improve the security posture if they're unable to take the industry recommended approach. So it is not one solution type answer, but something that a well-staffed MSP and MSSP can help you work through. So that's I think another important quality in choosing an MSP relationship or MSSP relationship is somebody that can work with you and understands that there are many different ways to achieve the outcome when it comes to security.
And to be clear, had that been done, had a pen test been done, this would have been found, you know, that threat vector would have been closed. So yeah, and that's, again, that's a whole lot cheaper than what, you know, what occurred after the fact.
Absolutely. Okay, let's go on to a second case study, and then, you know, as we get to the end of this one, let's see if we can do the same of, you know, what could we have done earlier in the process, not we DataPrize, but the client or companies as a whole to have mitigated it in advance. But with that, Jeff, take us through this one, please.
Yeah, this is the famous hafnium problem with the exchange servers. And in that case, this is a classic example of, look, the vendors that you have, and Microsoft is obviously the 500-pound gorilla. They're going to do releases, you know, of 0 days that they found, and they should, right? What you have to recognize is, since this is a business for the bad guys, you know, about 15 seconds after they release that, they're already starting the reverse engineering. And in this hafnium case, they basically automated the process to go out and put an anchor point in, you know, 13,000 exchange servers all over the globe, to put an exploit in there before anyone patched it, because they know you as a business, or you're busy, but you're not doing it 15 minutes after Microsoft puts it out, right? So they took advantage of that. What they did was they ran those automated processes, and, you know, to leave that anchor point so they could come back later and then prioritize it and see which ones they could go after. And what it did was it put a back door in so that the bad guys could come in later, simply, you know, come in through a remote port, put in a password, and they had full access to your exchange server, inside access. So that's what the hafnium exploit was. So even if you did patch, had they done that before you got there, which in most cases they had, because like I said, they automated this process. You know, they just search for all exchange servers and then executed on it. Had you done the patch, you still weren't safe. They'd already put in the exploits. So in this case, we ran the hafnium scripts, went in, and you can find they used what was called an ASPX file that was not a legit ASPX file to create that, to run that shell, that PowerShell. So we had a process where we'd go in and find that. So for the customers that engaged that quickly, it was a minor fix. I mean, it was like 10, 20 hours to get in there and clean everything up. To the ones that waited, turned into full instant responses. So, you know, that's a classic example of early detection. Was a whole lot, you know, it's a magnitude of 10, you know, from 10 hours to 100 hours to clean that out. And, you know, and then if you got ransomware, it got even farther. So that was the nature of this. But, you know, the kind of the lessons learned out of that is in patching in general. You know, all those things, when a new 0 day comes out from a deal, just understand that the bad guys are already all over it. That's why it's very important to keep your patches up to date as soon as you can, because they're getting more and more creative in how to do that and create that market. You know, and always remember that, you know, they're a business, they're run like a major corporation. If you're the third largest economy on the planet, you're pretty good at it, right? So anything to add on that, Jones?
No, this was the hafnium, the week from you know where, was absolutely overwhelming, and we saw a number of cases where customers had patched but had been infected in this manner prior to what you were speaking about. And I know that DataPrize ended up spending a significant amount of time helping a number of customers rebuild from that. So.
Right. So, you know, again, this was an interesting one because it was, you know, focused, you know, but it just kind of goes to show how creative they are, and how mechanized they are, that they got these out to. I mean, we did 70 IRs in a matter of 45 days just on this alone. It was insanity. We didn't sleep much, you know. And we keep calling it the Microsoft, the gift that keeps on giving, right? So, you know, we keep getting more and more to do. So anyway, that was the main things I wanted to talk about. Yeah, and that was back in March. And there were people that were in it to give you the the level of the nation state thing, it's what we call advanced persistent threats. That was an exploit that had been going on for quite a while, and there were very high level players that were exploiting it. When Microsoft put that out, then everyone got in the game, right? So,
and with that,
we call it the China chopper, to give you the nation state, right? So go ahead. I'm sorry.
So no, I was going to say, and with that, that just brings me to get you guys to give us some final thoughts, and then attendees can have a moment here to be putting in some questions. As you give us, what are the big takeaways?
So I would say this is a very serious topic. Please take some time to invest some resources into your cybersecurity hygiene and posture, whether that's through a partnership with somebody like DataPrize and Blue Team Alpha, whether that's an internal thing with your own staff. Back up your critical data. If it's important enough to pay a ransom for, it's important enough to back up before it becomes a problem. Make sure somebody's monitoring everything. Really practice your responses and your plans. Jeff mentioned tabletop exercises. These are extremely important in making sure that you're not trying to figure this stuff out the day of. So I would say create a plan, create your policies. Ransomware is not going away. It is way too lucrative of a business. They are forming themselves up, whether you like the ethics of it or not. They are turning themselves into businesses, into syndicates at this point, with full-on affiliate models. So this is a very real threat. This will continue to be a threat, regardless of how insignificant you think your data is or your small little company is. If you have intellectual property, if you have PII or PHI or something embarrassing, you are absolutely a target. You are absolutely on somebody's radar, and now is the time to do something about it.
Yeah, I would reiterate most of that, in that prevention is the key. It's your cheaper option. Also think like the bad guy. Think of what would be of monetary value to them, to you, and look at it from that way. If the other part of that is again, the tabletops, the evaluation. If you don't know what you have, you can't defend it, right? And then those layered defenses, move the crown jewels back to the center of the castle, are the main things there that I would put out there. And always be prepared.
There you go. Okay, and one offer that we just wanted to share with attendees is that we'd be happy to do a cybersecurity posture check, and we'll send out this link post the webinar in the follow-up with the presentation, but provide a report on some of the findings and some of the areas that align with what we covered here. So I am going to put you guys' mugs back up briefly while I ask you some questions. One that came through is, it looks like the Colonial Pipeline paid a fairly low fee of $4.4 million for the damage. Does this mean that it was done by a less sophisticated organization?
Not necessarily. It could be. We don't know what's behind the curtain, right? We don't know how prepared they were. Obviously, not prepared enough, but we don't know what they were able to recover and what they were able to do. That's what I meant about there's negotiations with the ransomware. It could be that they didn't have as much leverage over them as possible, but it also reiterates that point that it's not just about the ransomware. The damage they did, was extensive beyond the ransomware. That's why it took it down. And especially with infrastructure, stuff like that, it doesn't take much to tip it over. Those industries run on very low margins. So as a result, they have you would think they would have failovers behind failovers, but sometimes it's easy to get through the second failover pretty quickly. So I wouldn't assume that. We've seen ransoms upwards of 10 million for our organizations that were way smaller than that one. It's usually just relative to the amount of leverage they have on you. Excellent. Jones, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, no, I would echo that. It doesn't necessarily, it's not indicative of their skill level. The dark side group is very well known and has been around a while. They're getting really good at what they do. But like any business, say your credit card company, they'd be happy to get something instead of nothing. My understanding is that the initial ransom request was much higher than what ended up being paid, that they were able to negotiate a little bit of a lower price for it. That is absolutely a thing. Again, these are business people, and if they're able to get something, it is much better than getting nothing. So
yeah, and as long as you remember that's a business transaction, that's you're the other side of that business transaction, so that's probably what occurred.
And then one last question, and it goes to the idea of identify how long can something like this or vulnerability be sitting in the network before it starts to be exploited? And I guess, is ransomware something you immediately know, or could it be in there and if you don't find it, it'll be exposed later?
It could be in there a long time. We call those APTs, advanced persistent threats, and that's where the nation state thing comes in. And when you think of this as a business element, just like with the Hafnium, they didn't execute on the actual exploit for financial gain on all those at once. They prioritized them. They went after the ones they thought they'd make the most money quickly. And they held the others for that's their rainy day fund. Think of it as big rocks, medium rocks, little rocks. They went after the big rocks first, so it can stay in there a long time. That's where those things like identifying the vulnerability is key. If you identify the vulnerability, a lot of times that's when you find say, hey, the back door's unlocked, but I also noticed that there was markings look like someone took a screwdriver to it. Okay, what else? Is there a window open? It changes your viewpoint if you think, oh, that was just an oversight. But if you see someone's used that deal, it opens your view into, well, we need to look a little deeper, right? So that's kind of the key point on that.
And it's important to understand too that the actual encryption portion of the attack is usually the last thing. That's the thing that's going to be very visible, the thing that's going to cause the victim to notice that there is a problem, if they haven't already. The attackers are actually much more interested in doing the reconnaissance, identifying what else is available. Again, they're trying to steal as much as possible. They're trying to identify something embarrassing, sensitive, really valuable. Once they have that, now it's time to make the customer aware, if they're not aware, that they have been infected. And so that's where the encryption comes in. So, to Jeff's point, an APT can hang around for quite a while because they're busy doing things. And if they've gone unnoticed, then that incentivizes them to keep going more. The actual ransom usually comes once they feel they've been discovered or once they've exploited the network for everything that it's worth to them.
Right, they're going to extract first before they expose themselves. Now, it did make me think of another thing we haven't talked about. I know, unfortunately, a lot of times when we get to these, someone's in an IR or something, you get there and you go to figure out, all right, where'd they get in, where'd they go? Sometimes we run into the fact that someone's only saved logs for a week or something. It's like, you should really consider keeping your logs as long as you can. I understand it's a financial decision because data costs money, right? But a week isn't enough. We've run into that, and you're like going, you've really kind of taken, you kind of tied one hand behind our back here, because we use the logs to go figure out where else they went, right? We see those indicators of compromise in those logs, and if you're only keeping them for a week, that's a problem, right? We've had ones where they've kept them for a day. You just kind of, you're just going, okay, we're just literally blind, You called us yesterday and already those logs are gone. So that's a key point, just to go check and see what your log retention policies are, especially around, accounts, things like that, the crown jewels, always keep those longer, those kind of things.
So is there a best practice for how long to keep those logs?
Well, and so it depends on what industry you're in. Different industries actually have, like FFIAC in the banking deal, and PCI DSS have, at least 6 months. Some of them are a year. High trust in the healthcare require, I think it's a year. So usually 6 months, year if you can, for sure. You know, you can always archive them too. You know, there's other options that are cheaper options for keeping them long term, but you know, at least 6 months to a year, you know, would be the preferred. You know,
Excellent. And if there are obviously regulations or industry standards that you need to follow, but if not, 6 months is a baseline best
right?
practice.
That would be my recommendation.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for taking the time, and thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, and we look forward to seeing you all on a future webinar. Thanks, Jones. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jones.
Thank you, sir.